I did it again. I turned it off. So I just do that repeatedly. So now we're going to know that there are two links. I just have to remember to not touch my keyboard because any touch of it shuts it down. So anyway, I'm on page 35 in the novel. And the last sentence of this first paragraph is very telling about her mindset. It says the adult mind can lie with untroubled conscience and a gay composure, but in those days even a small deception scoured the tongue, lashing one against the stake itself. So she is making a comparison between what she now knows and what she knew as a young 21-year-old maiden, essentially. Um, and we get really interesting pictures of Mrs. Van Hopper. Did you notice how many times Mrs. Van Hopper smashes cigarettes in things? Now, that's telling in and of itself because that thrusts us forward into the 1938 approximately, because in the past, our characters were women who didn't smoke. Well, Mrs. Van Hopper smashes cigarettes all the time. The trouble is, with me laid up like this, you haven't got enough to do. She's laid up because she's got the flu, and she stayed in bed for 2 weeks. Wouldn't that be something else? Not that I would sit in bed for 2 weeks. She said, mashing her cigarette in a jar of cleansing cream. Imagine the visual provided by this. If we go to the next page, there's a reference, and this is not the only reference we see in this novel, to Taxol. So far as I can tell, Taxol must be the equivalent. Maxine makes a reference to it too. They're fruity smelling salts. Um, in some ways, this must be like that camphor stuff. Remember how you used to smear that smelly stuff on your chest if you got a cold? And I think this is used in the same approximate way. Anyway, I was just interested. Um, if we get to the middle of the page, she says, this is the I speaker again. I have forgotten much of Monte Carlo, of those morning drives, of where we went, even our conversation. But I have not forgotten how my fingers trembled, cramming on my hat, and how I ran along the corridor and down the stairs, too impatient to wait for the slow winding of the lift, so outside brushing the swinging doors before the commissioner could help me. So she's very young, and she's pretty smitten with Maxine, and runs down the hallway like a young girl. And if we have, I have a bit here about Monte Carlo, and this description says that Monte Carlo is the epitome of extravagance. Located in France's Côte d'Azur, uh, d'Azur, Côte d'Azur, sorry. It's the kind of place where even today we can find the rich, the famous, and the popular. Monte Carlo is where Maxine and Mrs. De Winter, the I speaker Mrs. De Winter, meet and is therefore the site of her reversal of fortune. One minute she's a penniless orphan with few job prospects, who seems condemned to a life of serving people like Mrs. Van Hopper. The next minute she's marrying the rich, handsome, and mysterious Maxime de Winter. Um, During Maxime and Mrs. De Winter's brief courtship in Monte Carlo, he drives her up to a high precipice overlooking the ocean, where she gets a little afraid Maxime might push her to her death. There's just a hint of that. Um, Turns out she wasn't being completely crazy. During Maxime's big confession, oh, never mind, don't want to read that part. But in any case, we'll get to that. Let's return to the novel because they ride. Well, I don't know. I want to just finish that thought. They ride up to this precipice, and of course, that must be in some ways representative of what happens to the I speaker. She's on the verge of perhaps a precipice in her life. Remember, this whole novel is for the most part retrospective. At the bottom of page 36, I was like a scrubby schoolboy with a passion for a sixth form prefect and his kinder and far more inaccessible. She repeatedly represents herself as a schoolboy. Later, she'll represent herself as a girl. She's 21, but she is really a novice at this whole thing. At the time, at the top of page 37, not for me the languor and the subtlety I had read about in books, the challenge and the chase, the sword play, the swift glance, the stimulating smile. So she that's the romance that she read about, but that's not what's happening right now. In the middle of page 37, she talks about when I opened my eyes, we were by a bend in the road, and a peasant girl in a black shawl waved to us. I just referred to that. I can see her now, her dusty skirt, her gleaming friendly smile, and in a second we had passed the bend and could see her no more. Already she belonged to the past. She was only a memory. This is an important element of the way Mrs. De Winter, the eye speaker, um, tells us her story. Next paragraph, I wanted to go back again to recapture the moment that had gone, and then it came to me that if we did, it would not be the same. Even the sun would be changed in the sky, casting another shadow, and the peasant girl would trudge past us along the road in a different way. Not waving this time, perhaps not even seeing us. There was something chilling in that thought, something a little melancholy. And looking at the clock, I saw that 5 more minutes had gone by. Soon we would have reached our time limit and must return to the hotel. Um, she talks. She makes many references to capturing memories, and making that contrast between now and then. Next paragraph. If only there were an invention. This is what I was talking about. I said impulsively that bottled up a memory like scent, and it never faded. The important element in that sentence is the foreshadowing it suggests, because Maxime has his own memories that he does not want to bottle up and keep forever. It never faded and it never got stale. And then, when one wanted it, the bottle could be uncorked and it would be like living the moment all over again. Um, Without giving away the ending of the story, or even the last third of the story, Maxime is overwhelmed by his memories, and we'll see him over and over and over. His face will cloud up. Um, Pay attention as you're reading to particularly his facial expressions, and when we get to Mrs. Danvers, you have to pay attention to her facial expressions too. There's a mystery, a cloud behind the facial expression. Um, I looked up at him to see what he would say. He did not turn to me. He went on watching the road ahead. What particular moments in your young life do you wish uncorked? We're wondering what memories he does not want to uncork. On page 38, um, there's just another reference to her tearing at her nails. The anxiety in here is just now beginning. The anxiety grows. We're only on page 38. The anxiety grows as she tells her tale. Look over on page 39. She, for the first time, makes a reference to your wife. You can hear in the back of your mind a gong. Boom. Your wife. The word lingered in the air once I had uttered it, dancing before me, and because he received it silently, making no comment, the word magnified itself into something heinous and appalling. A forbidden word, unnatural to the tongue, underscoring the mystery of your wife. At the end, or in the middle of page 39, the bustle and finality of departure, the sound of the car changing gears as it turned the corner. Listen to the sounds. Du Maurier is really good at um, identifying sensory detail. Here we have sound, and then even that sound merging into the common traffic and being lost and so absorbed forever. And then at the end of the next paragraph, he sat motionless without his hat and with his white scarf around his neck, looking more than ever like someone medieval who lived within a frame. He did not belong to the bright landscape. He could be standing on the steps of a gaunt cathedral, his cloak flung back, while a beggar at his feet scrambled for gold coins. She's created a picture of him. And remember the unknown gentleman portrait. This is what she's got in her head. You can just see that white scarf and the black cloak. Um, it's just out of a different time period. At the top of page 40, you would like, you told me, at a chosen moment, to live the past again. I'm afraid I think rather differently from you. This is Maxine. All memories are bitter. This is an important paragraph, and I prefer to ignore them. Something happened a year ago that altered my whole life, and I want to forget every phase of my existence up to that time. Those days are finished. They are blotted out. I must begin living all over again. So she is immersed in intertwining the past and the present. That's how she's unfolding this story. And here we're getting a hint that Maxime has a mysterious, perhaps even a dark past. So this is where they get to the top of the precipice. When we climbed the hills and looked down over the precipice, I was there some years ago with my wife. You asked me if it was still the same, if it had changed at all. It was just the same, but I was thankful to realize, oddly impersonal. He has a very clear indifference to his past. And this is the mystery that the eye speaker keeps trying to penetrate. Um, so she says, let's see. Oh, there's just some more references to Mrs. Van Hopper, who is, of course, a pretty crude American in Europe. The Americans in Europe are always presented that way. Remember her smashing her cigarettes in butter one time, I think. Um, Mrs. Van Hopper is inclined to play cards. One of the card games is Bezique. I had to look that up. But it's one of her card games that she plays with her cronies who come and live with her. She also has the mashed stubs of cigarettes lay everywhere in cleansing cream, in a dish of grapes, and on the floor beneath the bed. That's kind of disgusting, I'm just going to say. If you look at the top of page 42, um, we have we have the eye speaker. Is this the eye speaker? Yes, she says on the preceding page. Later, her friends would come in for a drink, which I must mix for them, hating my task, shy and ill at ease in my corner, hemmed in by their parrot chatter, and I would be a whipping boy again. Again, she refers to herself as a boy. Um, Feeling not very feminine or attractive. Blushing for her when, excited by her little crowd, she must sit up in bed and talk too loudly, laugh too long, reach to the portable gramophone and start a record, shrugging her large shoulders to the tune. That's just an interesting reference to the time. The gramophone, of course, is from this time period in the late 30s. I preferred her irritable and snappy, her hair done up in pins, scolding me for forgetting her tack song. All this awaited me in the suite, while he, once he had left me at the hotel, would go away somewhere alone towards the sea, perhaps. That's something else you have to notice. As you're, especially when we get to Manderley, how many times she mentions the sea. I'll talk to you a little bit about that when we get that far. Um, Next paragraph, the gulf that lay between us was wider now than it had ever been, and he stood away from me with his back turned on the further shore. They're still on that precipice. I felt young and small and very much alone, and now, in spite of my pride, I found his handkerchief and blew my nose, throwing my drab appearance to the winds. It could never matter. She's always self-deprecating. Um, at the top of page 43, I was still child enough to consider a Christian name like a plume in the hat. I was just dying to know what her name was. Of course, we're never gonna know. The morning, for all its shadowed moments, had promoted me to a new level of friendship. He had kissed me too, a natural business, comforting and quiet, not dramatic as in books. Always the dream from her romances. The gulf between us had been bridged after all. What? Oh, the gulf between us. Okay, never mind. Um, Tell me, is Max de Winter still in the hotel? I hesitated at the moment, like a diver on the brink, then lost my nerve and my tutored self-possession, saying, "Yes, I believe so. He comes into the restaurant for his meals." We're going to see her more and more um, romanticizing or creating stories about about her perceptions. We'll see this over and over and over. Next paragraph, 43. This is the second complete paragraph. Someone has told her, I thought. Someone has seen us together. The tennis professional has complained. The manager has sent a note. And I waited for her to attack. She's always creating these scenarios and then discovers most of the time that they're not the case. Um, Down at the bottom of this page, I said nothing. I watched her pick up the lipstick and outline a bow between her hard mouth. This is the hard mouth of Mrs. Van Hopper. I never saw her, she said, holding the glass away to see the effect, but I believe she was very lovely, exquisitely turned out, and brilliant in every way. Mrs. Van Hopper thrives on gossip, and this is what she knows about Rebecca, already setting the stage for the great unknown Rebecca in the mind of the eye speaker. It was all, they used to give tremendous parties at Manderley. It was all very sudden and tragic, and I believe he adored her. So that's purely speculative gossip from Mrs. Hopper, but we can see how the path is being laid for the eye speaker to begin speculating about Rebecca. The next page, top of 44. It was not I that answered. I was not there at all. I was following a phantom in my mind, whose shadowy form had taken shape at last. Her features, that's Rebecca's, were blurred, her coloring indistinct. The setting of her eyes and the texture of her hair were still uncertain, still to be revealed. That's a really telling detail. The phantom in my mind. She again speculates. Um, Perhaps in cupboards there were clothes that she had worn. Perhaps, this is speculative, with the scent about them still. We're going to see about that scent. Um, in my bedroom, under my pillow, I had a book that she had taken in her hands, and I could see her turning to the first white page, smiling as she wrote, and shaking the bent nib. Max from Rebecca. She's referring to that book of poetry that Maxime had given the eye speaker. Remember, we read about that poem that was on page 32 and the top of 33. Um, and it was about the pursuit by God of a sinner. Just keep that in your mind. Um, let's see. Max from Rebecca. It must have been his birthday, and she had put it amongst her other presents on the breakfast table. This is purely a scenario she's creating in her head. And they had laughed together as he tore off the paper and the string. She leant perhaps over his shoulder while he read. Max, she called him Max. It was familiar, gay, and easy on the tongue. The family could call him Maxime if they liked, grandmothers and aunts, and people like myself, quiet and dull and youthful, who did not matter. Max was her choice. The word was her possession. She had written it with so great a confidence on the flyleaf of the book. That bold, slanting hand stabbing the white paper, the symbol of herself, so certain, so assured. So even this early on, she makes a clear comparison between herself and Rebecca. Rebecca was assured, and the eye speaker is not. She's shy and awkward. How many times she must have written to him thus, in how many varied moods. Throughout this, um, we see her self deprecation. The last sentence of this chapter is, and I had to call him Maxime. So she sees herself as having to address him formally because she's so awkward and youthful. In the next chapter, um, they are packing up and leaving Monte Carlo. And I just think that the details here in this first paragraph are really interesting. Lost keys, unwritten labels, tissue paper lying on the floor. I hate it all. Even now, when I have done so much of it, when I live, as the saying goes, in my boxes. It's like living in a suitcase. We all know what that's like. I am aware of sadness, of a sense of loss. Here I say we have lived, we have been happy. They've been in Monte Carlo for weeks following their marriage, and it was tantamount to being on a vacation. It reminded me somehow of having gone to Las Vegas. If you've ever gone to Las Vegas, or even a vacation home or something, you are isolated from your home life, and then you go home and everything's just a little bit. It's a little bit sad to leave the vacation. Like Las Vegas is so itself that um, you begin, and then when you return to your life, it's kind of a surprise. Nothing material, not a hairpin on the dressing table, not an empty bottle of aspirin tablets, not a handkerchief beneath a pillow, but something indefinable, a moment of our lives, a thought, a mood, a moment of our lives. She's always trying to capture that. At the end of the next paragraph, we know one another. This is the present. There is no past and no future. So we is Maxime and I. Here I am, washing my hands, and the cracked mirror shows me to myself, suspended as it were in time. This is me. This moment will not pass. Um, as you are reading, notice her references to memory. She thinks in the next paragraph how in that moment I have aged and passed on, how I have advanced one step towards an unknown destiny, like standing on that precipice. You begin to admire Du Maurier's descriptive ability. At the bottom of this page, we smile, we choose our lunch, we speak of this and that, but I say to myself, I am not she who left him 5 minutes ago. She has stayed behind. I am another woman, older, more mature. I don't know if she is, but that's her way of placing herself in time. Next paragraph. I saw in a paper the other day that the Hotel Côte d'Azur at Monte Carlo had gone to new management and it had a different name. So she's in the present, looking back on Monte Carlo, and thinking to herself that that their experience is now somehow gone because the setting has changed. Down at the bottom, page 46. What an odd, unsatisfactory child you are. I can't make you out. Don't you realize that at home, girls in your position without any money can have the grandest fun? Plenty of boys and excitement, all in your own class. That's another thing that becomes very apparent when they finally get to Manderley, is the difference in her class. You can have your own little set of friends and needn't be at my beck and call as much as you are here. I thought you didn't care for Monty. That's Mrs. Hopper. Mrs. Hopper, of course, was very derogatory towards the eye speaker because she was the hired help. She was a hired companion, and she is reiterating to the eye speaker that she had no prospects. She had no money, and the only thing that she could do was hire herself out as a companion. Oh, yeah, here's the at the top of page 47. She laughed disagreeably, squashing her cigarette in the butter. Ew. Then let's see. There's a reference right in the middle of the next paragraph to a wagonlet. I didn't know what a wagonlet was, but apparently it is a sleeping car on a train. Uh, so we would wash and clean our teeth in that stuffy little compartment with the rattling doors, the splash basin, the damp towel, the soap with a single hair on it. If we haven't had that in our lives, then we have missed something. But I just think that Du Maurier's details are fabulous. The soap with a single hair on it. Down at the next paragraph, and he would light a cigarette casually, asking a passing waiter for a light, while I thought 4.5 more minutes to go. I shall never see him again. So, as you recall, Mrs. Van Hopper decides quickly that it's time to leave, and the eye speaker has no choice because she's the help, and she has to go where Mrs. Van Hopper is going, and she kind of panics that in 4.5 more minutes she is not going to see Maxime ever again. Down at the bottom of this page, the second last sentence, she says, and we would waste the last moments laughing at a stranger because we were already strangers to one another. Here again, we have this introspective speculation about what is going on in other people's minds. I hope the snapshots come out well, repeating oneself in desperation. And this is speculation. This is a story she's creating. And yes, that one of the square ought to be good. The light was just right. Having both of us gone into all that at the time, having agreed upon it, and anyway, I would not care if the result was fogged and black, because this was the last moment. The final goodbye had been attained. She's already regretting leaving. But this is all a story. She does this over and over and over. She tells stories about what people are thinking. Sitting there ridiculously on the cork mat of the bathroom floor, I lived it all, and our journey to and our arrival in New York. She's locked herself in the bathroom and is essentially crying her eyes out because she's going to leave behind Maxime. She wants to be alone with my own thoughts as I was now, locked behind the bathroom door. It's really very modern, isn't it? Down at the bottom, again, she speculates. She tells a story about what she thinks is going to happen. He would go back to Manderley, of course, in a few weeks. I felt certain of that. There would be a great pile of letters waiting for him in the hall, and mine amongst them, scribbled on the boat. A forced letter, trying to amuse, describing my fellow passengers. It would lie about inside his blotter, and he would answer it weeks later, one Sunday morning in a hurry, before lunch, having come across it when he paid some bills, and then no more. Nothing until the final degradation of the Christmas card. This is the story she's creating. She has such an imagination. I know we all do this kind of thing. We speculate about what people are thinking, but she does it in a way that is really imaginative. And it's entertaining. That I think that's part of why this book is so interesting. Down at the bottom of, or at the top of 49, I dragged myself back from Christmas at Manderley to the realities of the wagonlet. And then there it is in the middle of page 49, odious. It's my favorite word. The odious reception clerk smiled when he saw me. If you if you are looking for Mr. De Winter, we had a message from Cannes to say he would not be back before midnight. Oh no! The odious clerk gives her that news. Um, Speaking of Daphne, let's see. just a couple of details on the second last paragraph on page 49. She's got a Revelation suitcase and a stout holdall. Well, Revelation suitcase is it's a brand name for, at the time, they were leather covered suitcases, and sometimes they had expandable clasps so that if you overstuffed your suitcase, the clasp would expand and you get an extra couple of inches to stuff some more things in it. And a holdall is it was a duffel bag, and you would lay it out flat, and then you would roll things. You would roll out the duffel bag, and then it would strap together. So it I suppose it was a precursor to the duffel bags that we might now use. She says at the bottom of this page, and the wild anxiety in the morning to hide all traces from the world, sponging with cold water, dabbing eau de cologne, the furtive dash of powder that is significant in itself, the panic, too, that one might cry again, the tears swelling without control, and a fatal trembling of the mouth led one to disaster. Um, we participate in her panic, her anxiety over the loss. Monte Carlo was suddenly full of kindliness and charm, the one place in the world that held sincerity. I loved it. Affection overwhelmed me. I wanted to live there all my life, and I was leaving it today. There's such a finality to her saying goodbye to this place. There I was, padding about in a dressing gown, making a slough of sentiment out of a commonplace hotel bedroom. Um, then she's talking about Mrs. Van Hopper. My indifference to her turned to hatred. I can just squishing the cigarette butt in the butter. Just about it summarizes Mrs. Van Hopper. Top of page 51, last sentence of the first complete paragraph. I was merely. She is so desperate that she goes to knock on Maxine's door, and there he is, shaving by an open window, a camel hair jacket over his pajamas. He's in his jammies. Bold, bold. And I, in my flannel suit and heavy shoes, felt clumsy and overdressed. I was merely foolish when I had felt myself dramatic. Again, the self-deprecation. She gets a moment of confidence, is so panicked over leaving that she goes to a store. He took his clothes off the chair and threw them on the bathroom floor and went inside, slamming the door. So he gets himself dressed. She says, I sat down on the bed and began biting my nails. Always, always picking her nails and biting them. Yeah, I mean, you can just see it. Um, Look at the detail in this last paragraph on 51. The situation was unreal, and I felt like a lay figure. I wondered what he was thinking, what he was going to do. I glanced around the room, and it was the room of any man, untidy and impersonal. Lots of shoes, more than were ever needed, and the strings of ties. The dressing table was bare, except for a large bottle of hair wash and a pair of ivory hairbrushes. No photographs, no snapshots. That's a telling detail. He has really separated himself from his past. Nothing like that. Instinctively, I had looked for them, thinking there would be one photograph at least beside his bed or in the middle of the mantelpiece. One large one in a leather frame. There were only books, though, and lots of cigarettes. People smoked a lot. Must have smelled terrible. Down at the bottom of this page, again, speculative detail. She's thinking this imaginative scene about what she might find there but didn't. Um, so he says at the bottom of the page, not very romantic, I'm just going to say. Um, I am invariably ill tempered in the early morning. I repeat to you, the choice is open to you. Either go to America with Mrs. Van Hopper or you come home to Manderley with me. Well, you have to go back and read that again. Do you mean you want a secretary or something? No, I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool. That seems very manipulative, doesn't it? It there's not a lot of emotional contribution by Maxine to her. She wants a little romance. She says at the bottom, you don't understand, I said when the waiter had gone. I'm not the sort of person men marry. Self deprecating. Top of 53, or middle third of 53. You think I asked you to marry me for the same reason you believed I drove you about in the car? Yes, and gave you dinner that first evening, to be kind, don't you? She said, yes, that's what it seems like to me. And he says, you haven't answered my question. Are you going to marry me? Remember her standing on the edge of that precipice? Well, now she's just about ready to jump. Next paragraph. I don't believe, even in my fiercest moments, I had considered this possibility. I had once, when driving with him, and we had been silent for many miles, started a rambling story in my head about him being very ill, delirious, I think, and sending for me and I having to nurse him. That's typical. Um, a rambling story in my head. That's what she does. She does that all the time. Next paragraph. And another time, or no, a couple of lines. And another time I had imagined living in a lodge on the grounds of Manderley and how he would come visit me sometimes and sit in front of the fire. And she could never allow herself to figure that she would actually marry him. At the bottom of the page. My suggestion doesn't seem to have gone too well, he said. I'm sorry. I rather thought you loved me. A fine blow to my conceit. So I just thought that was an interesting contrast. He thinks she loves him, but we're not getting a lot of emotion the other way back to her. She said, I do love you. And at the end of the next paragraph, he says, it's a pity you have to grow up. I wrote in the margin, Peter Pan. That's I'm sure that Du Maurier did not mean that, but it seemed like that. I was ashamed already and angry with him for laughing. So women did not make those confessions to men. I had a lot to learn. Yes, you have a lot to learn. Here's his reference at the end of the next paragraph. The only difference is that I don't take Taxol. I prefer Enos, and you must never let me run out of my particular brand of toothpaste. Mm, That's kind of her future role, at least we think. So those two, as I said, Taxol and Enos, it's a kind of fruit-flavored Alka-Seltzer. I think they bubble too. Yeah, I wrote in the margin, effervescent antacid. That's like Alka-Seltzer. I drummed with my fingers on the table, uncertain of myself and of him. Was he still laughing at me? Was it all a joke? He looked up and saw the anxiety on my face. I'm being rather a brute to you, aren't I? Yes. He wanted to show me Manderley. She's finally getting it, and suddenly I realized that it would all happen. I would be his wife, we would walk in the garden together, we would stroll down that path in the valley to the single beach. There's the story again, what she is envisioning. I know how I would stand on the steps and after breakfast looking at the day, throwing crumbs to the birds, and later wander out in a shady hat with long scissors in my hand and cut flowers for the house. I knew now why I had bought the picture postcard as a child. It was a premonition, a blank step into the future. Remember the postcard? She bought this when she was quite young, and it was of Manderley, and it wasn't even a good reproduction. But the um, the postcard, I've got a little bit about here. None of this is in any particular good order. Okay, the postcard. And the postcard's going to factor in again and again. Um, the eye speaker remembers buying a postcard of Manderley as a child. This little touch makes the whole story seem somehow meant to be, as if this Mrs. De Winter's life is a road which always leads back to Manderley. At the same time, the postcard creates the image of Manderley as a place that's out of reach. Is it out of reach? We'll see. After all, postcards are sent from exciting, far off places, places you might never expect to return to. Remember the first line of the novel, I dreamt I returned to Manderley. It was a dream that she returned to Manderley, indicating already that you can't return. And this is what this postcard is referring to. Um, Last sentence of page 54. I knew now why I already said that. Top of page 55. He wanted to show me Manderley. My mind ran riot then. Figures came before me, and picture after picture. And all the while he ate his tangerine, giving me a piece now and then, and watching me. Mrs. De Winter. I would be Mrs. De Winter. I considered my name and the signature on checks to tradesmen and in letters asking people to dinner. But she has no name of her own. That's been made abundantly clear. So you can feel her emotion. You can feel it. I'm going to be Mrs. De Winter, and I'm going to go to Manderley, and it's all going to be heaven on earth. Next paragraph at the end. It's really wonderful how happy you have made him. Everyone is so pleased, and you are such a success. Mrs. De Winter. I would be Mrs. De Winter. She's speculating that that is the response that his peers are going to have. We'll see if that plays out. Notice how pervasive the foreshadowing is in the novel. Down at the bottom of page 55, he was folding up his napkin, pushing back his plate, and I wondered how it was he spoke so casually, as though the matter was of little consequence, a mere adjustment of plans, whereas to me it was a bombshell, exploding in 1,000 fragments. So that is kind of a summary of how this marriage proposal impacts them. For him, of little consequences. He's going back to his old world. For her, it's a big deal. Next page. She just keeps saying this. I am going to be Mrs. De Winter. I'm going to live at Manderley. Manderley will belong to me. Next paragraph. We came to the door of the suite. I think I had better deal with this alone, he said. Tell me something. Do you mind how soon you marry me? You don't want a trousseau, do you? Or any of that nonsense? I bet she did. Because of the whole thing can be so easily arranged in a few days, over a desk with a license, and then often in the car to Venice or anywhere you fancy. So what we're going to learn is 2 sentences later, I had that sort of wedding before. He makes not very many references to the first Mrs. De Winter, but here's one there. He does not want the same kind of wedding. He wants to do it differently. Of course, I answered. I was thinking for the moment we would be married at home. Naturally, I don't expect a church or people or anything like that. And I smiled at him. I made a cheerful face. Won't it be fun? I said. She's so young. It'll be fun. We'll get married at home. He wants to just run off to the clerk. Top of page 57. Then I went into my bedroom and sat down by the open window. Just looking out the window, looking for something. It was like waiting in the anteroom at a doctor's. That's a very interesting analogy, isn't it? Du Maurier makes many comparisons, but we have all been sitting in the anteroom at a doctor's office. And you just sit around. And then she says, I ought to turn over the pages of a magazine, look at photographs that did not matter, and read articles I should never remember. I just love that detail. And then such an adventure. This is in the middle of the next big paragraph. Such an adventure. I smiled to myself as I hugged my knees at the window seat, thinking how wonderful it was, how happy I was going to be. I was to marry a man I loved. I was to be Mrs. De Winter. It was foolish to go on having that pain in the pit of my stomach when I was so happy. That pain in the pit of her stomach comes out again and again and again as an indicator of her anxiety. And remember that one of the elements of the Gothic is anxiety. And in this case, it's anxiety over the unknown. In love, he had not said anything yet about being in love. No time, perhaps. It was all so hurried at the breakfast table. Marmalade and coffee and that tangerine. No time. The tangerine was very bitter. No, he had not said anything about being in love. Just that we would be married. Short and definite. The top of page 58. Only proposals were much better. Not like other original proposals were much better. Not like other people, which is true. It's not like other people. Not like him the first time asking Rebecca. I must not think of that. Put it away. A thought forbidden, prompted by demons. Get thee behind me, Satan. I must never think about that. Never, never, never. Get thee behind me, Satan is biblical. Of course, it's from Matthew. But the focus is here. Let's see. He loves me. He wants me. He wants to show me manderly. Would they ever have done? Would they ever have done with their thinking? Would they ever call me into the room? So she changes her focus away from get the behind me, Satan, away from the concept of Rebecca. So she has this book in her hand and it falls open again to that page, Max from Rebecca. She was dead and one must not have thoughts about the dead. They slept in peace. The grass blew over their graves. How alive was her writing, though, how full of force. So she cuts the page as if to purge the book of Rebecca and purge her mind of Rebecca. I cut the page right out of the book. She's becoming already early on a little obsessive about Rebecca. Even now the ink stood up on the fragments thick and black. The writing was not destroyed. I took a box of matches. And she sets the fragments on fire. And the last thing to go, pay attention to the fire. That appears later too. The letter was the last thing to go. The letter R was the last thing to go. It twisted in the flames. It curled outwards for a moment, becoming larger than ever. Then it crumbled too. The flame destroyed it. It was not ashes even. It was feathery dust. Of course, that's a pretty obvious reference to dust. Just hold that in your mind. I had the clean new feeling that one has when the calendar is hung on the wall at the beginning of the year, January the 1st. I was aware of the same freshness, the same gay confidence. Du Maurier's analogies are so good. Like that moment that when we put up a new calendar, the new pages. I have a French Bulldog calendar. It's new this year. It's puppies. He said nothing about being glad, about being happy. He did not take my arm and go into the sitting room with me. He smiled and waved his hand and went off down the corridor alone. I went to Mrs. Van Hopper, uncertain, rather self-conscious. Here's another analogy, like a maid who has handed in her notice through a friend. She sees herself like that. So Mrs. Van Hopper, always kind of mean, says, "Still waters certainly run deep in your case. How did you manage it?" So the eye speaker's placid demeanor perhaps covered a more passionate nature. Mrs. Van Hopper is trying to figure out how does this young girl capture the great Mr. De Winter. And Mrs. Van Hopper seems a bit sinister at this moment. I did not know what to answer. I did not like her smile. Kind of a sneer, you would think. He says, you realize, Mrs. Van Hopper says, you realize he's years older than you. And she said, the eye speaker says, he's only 42, and I am old for my age. Of course, there's quite a bit of irony there. She's young, very young, seems childish in some cases. At the top, It starts at the bottom of 59, appraising me, running her eyes over my points like a judge at a cattle show. Such a good comparison. There was nothing inquisitive about her eyes. There was something inquisitive about her eyes, something unpleasant. A couple paragraphs later, she laughed. She shrugged her shoulders. Oh, well, never mind. But I always said English girls were dark horses for all their hockey playing attitude. Um, I had to figure that one out. It as if they were coming from behind is essentially. I had to Google that. I wasn't even sure what that attitude is. It's coming from behind. So that's in fact where the I speaker was coming from, is behind. Next paragraph at the end, you will have your work cut out as mistress of Manderley. To be perfectly frank, my dear, I simply can't see you doing it. The Manderley parties are famous when she was alive. Yeah, we'll see these parties. Um, Naturally, one wants you to be happy, and I grant that he's a very attractive creature, but, well, I'm sorry, and personally, I think you're making a big mistake, one you will bitterly regret. Thanks, Mrs. Van Helper. uh, we go back to that analogy or that scene where she's standing on the edge of a precipice. Is this in fact what's happening or what's going to happen? We don't know yet. Top of 61. I grudged the months I had spent with her, employed by her, taking her money, trotting in her wake like a shadow, drab and dumb. Always self-deprecating. Of course I was inexperienced. Of course I was idiotic, shy, and young. I knew all that. She did not have to tell me. I supposed her attitude was deliberate, and for some odd feminine reason, she resented this marriage. Her scale of values had received a shock. Remember, Mrs. Van Hopper is always running after quality people, trying to attach herself. And now here's this young girl, the I speaker, attaches herself to be Mrs. De Winter. She is mad. She's jealous. The brink of a big adventure. Perhaps once she had gone, he would talk to me at last about loving me, about being happy. It's very telling, isn't it? That's the third time she's mentioned that. The end of this chapter. Of course, she said, you know why he's marrying you, don't you? You haven't flattered yourself he's in love with you. The fact is that empty house got on his nerves to such an extent he nearly went off his head. He admitted as much before you came into the room. He just can't go on living there alone. So he left Manderley in a hurry a year ago. So the mysterious events are beginning, there's little crumbs about them. And Mrs. Van Hopper makes a reference to it and really dashes her dreams about Maxime loving her. Um, Chapter 7. We came to Manderley in early May, arriving, so Maxime said, with the first swallows and the bluebells. The flowers in this at Manderley are really going to play a part. I have a little sticky to tell me something. 1 second. Oh, let me get to it. Let's see. It would be the best moment before the full flush of summer, and in the valley the azaleas would be prodigal of scent. Pay attention to the scent of the azaleas and the blood red rhododendrons in bloom. Really curious description. I'll come back to that in a second. We motored, I remember, leaving London in the morning in a heavy shower of rain, coming to Manderley. I always have these weather things. Go away. Coming to Manderley at about 5 o'clock. In time for tea. I could see myself now, unsuitably dressed, as usual, although a bride of 7 weeks in a tan-colored stockinette frock, a small fur known as a stone marten around my neck, and over all a shapeless mackintosh, too big for me and dragging to my ankles. All right, so we have a lot of important detail here. First of all, we're going to continue to see the rhododendrons being described in very descriptive red language, blood red. Then we smell the scent of the azaleas. The azaleas are white. Pay attention to references to whiteness. But one thing that I thought was interesting is the stockinette frock. This is really interesting because it sets it creates the setting. This is a stockinette frock, clearly of the late 30s. My sister and I, when we were younger, had a dress like that. I don't know where we got it or why we had it, but we shared it because we were approximately the same size, and we called it the Baby Huey dress. I don't know if you remember Baby Huey, but Baby Huey had kind of a pear shaped, and that's what those dresses do. It gives you a pear shape unless you're really, really thin. Well, the eye speaker apparently was. Anyway, just a fun fact to know and tell. So she's wearing also a stone marten. That is one of those little furs with the little face that bites the other end. Kind of gross. Um, then we go into the next paragraph. This is London rain, said Maxime when we left. You wait, the sun will be shining for you when we come to Manderley. The weather in the novel, and this is typical of Gothicism, reflects the interior state of mind. So they leave in rainy weather from London, and he's saying that when we get to Manderley, it will be bright and sunny. You can almost hear the music in the background, dun, 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 when they get to Manderley. Next paragraph. I was glad to see the sun, for in superstitious fashion I looked upon rain as an omen of ill will, and the leaden skies of London had made me silent, reflecting her interior state of mind. At the top of 63, I dreaded this arrival at Manderley as much as I had longed for it in theory. Right? Again, she's manufacturing what she thinks is going to happen when she gets there. We passed many friendly villages where the cottage windows had a kindly air. A woman, holding a baby in her arms, smiled at me from a doorway, while a man clanked across a road to a well carrying a pail. That is a bit reminiscent of them passing that peasant girl who waved at them. This is another one of those moments. I wish we could have been one with them, perhaps their neighbors, and that Maxime could lean over a cottage gate in the evenings, smoke a pipe, proud of a very tall hollyhock he had grown himself, while I bustled in my kitchen, clean as a pin, laying the table for supper. That's her story about what's going to happen. So she feels a stab of panic in the 2 paragraphs. I forced a smile and did not answer him, aware now of a stab of panic, of uneasy sickness that could not be controlled. Notice in the next couple of sentences the analogy to Maurier makes for us. I was like a child brought to her first school, or a little untrained maid who had never left home before, seeking a situation. Um, Any measure of self possession I had gained hitherto during the brief 7 weeks of marriage was like a rag now fluttering before the wind, and it seemed to me that even the most elementary knowledge of behavior was unknown to me now. She it's just enormously interesting that she associates herself with being a maid, um, a child on the first school day. We know what that feels like. I just think that Du Maurier creates these visions for us. What does that say? Oh, I don't know what that says. Um, so as we drove through, I saw on top of 64. I saw faces peering through the dark window of the lodge, and a child ran round from the back, staring curiously. I shrank back against the seat, my heart beating quickly, knowing why the faces were at the window and why the child stared. They're staring at her. Can you imagine how uncomfortable that is? She sees these, she creates another scenario in her head. They wanted to see what I was like. I could imagine them now. talking excitedly, laughing in the little kitchen. Only caught sight of the top of her hat, they would say. She wouldn't show her face. Oh, well, we'll know by tomorrow. This is just speculative on her part. She does this constantly. Next paragraph. Don't worry, he says to her. Mrs. Danvers does everything. Just leave it all to her. She will be stiff with you at first. Stiff? I dare say she's an extraordinary character, but you mustn't let it worry you. It's just her manner. Mrs. Danvers becomes a really important element of this whole um, setting it at Manderley. I did not answer him. Let's see. See these shrubs? It's like a blue wall along here where the hydrangeas are in blue. Notice this is the one of several times that the hydrangeas are um, painted as a wall. And walls keep things out. And so we'll see if that scenario occurs. I did not answer him, for I was thinking of that self who long ago bought a picture postcard in a village shop and came out into the bright sunlight, twisting it in her hands, pleased with her purchase, thinking this will do for my album. Manderley, what a lovely name. Um, that postcard again, remember, it's foreshadowing perhaps that everything in her life will eventually take her to Manderley. She creates another story for herself at the bottom of the page. We shall be down at Manderley. This is what she's going to write or say to people they come and, because then she's Mrs. De Winter and feeling more confident. But this is just a fiction in her head. Um, you must come and see us, and I would walk along this drive, strange and unfamiliar to me now, with perfect knowledge, conscious of every twist and turn, marking and approving where the gardeners had worked, here a cutting back of the shrubs, there a lopping of a branch, calling at the lodge by the iron gates on some friendly errand, saying, Well, how's the leg today to the old woman in the cottage? Already trying to place herself there. Top of 65. It seemed remote to me and far too distant, the time when I, too, should smile and be at ease, and I wished it could come quickly, that I could be old even, with gray hair and slow of the step, having lived there many years, anything but the timid, foolish creature I felt myself to be. She is dreading the entrance to Manderley. She has no idea what to expect. The gates had shut with a crash behind us. The dusty high road was out of sight, and I became aware that this was not the drive I had imagined. Would be Manderley's. This was not a broad and spacious thing of gravel, flanked with neat turf on either side, kept smooth with rake and branch. It's neglected. Well, he's been gone for a year, and she then um, says, they're on this path. This drive twisted and turned as a serpent. That's a pretty negative reference. We all know what the serpent is, but serpents are always foreboding. It's not a good omen. So they're driving along this drive, and the trees have now gone up and almost joined, and they're walking. They're driving. They're in a car. They're driving along this pathway. Even the engine of the car had taken a new note, throbbing low, quieter than before, because it's muffled in this very thick foliage. The length of it began to nag on my nerves. Oh, we're getting there, but I don't want to get there. Nothing but the silence and the deep woods. The lodge gates were a memory, and the high road something belonging to another time, another world. Okay, here we get another reference to the rhododendrons. I don't know about you, but mostly the rhododendrons that I know are pink. Various shades of pink, but these are blood red. We were amongst the rhododendrons. There was something bewildering, even shocking about the suddenness of their discovery. The woods had not prepared me for them. They startled me with their crimson faces, massed one upon the other in incredible profusion, showing no leaf, no twig, nothing but the slaughterous red, luscious and fantastic, unlike any rhododendron plant I had ever seen. That language is very, very bloody. Um, and, oh, okay. Um, the blood red rhododendrons and the white azaleas are both were both cultivated by Rebecca. Both dominate Manderley. The rhododendrons are all over the property, and various things owned by Rebecca still hold the scent of the azaleas. So these flowers are really important because the blood redness is suggestive of what happened to Rebecca. Perhaps there was some kind of injury. And the azaleas, also cultivated by Rebecca, the smell appears in in Rebecca's belongings, which are still in the house. That would drive me crazy. Um, And these were monsters, rearing to the sky, massed like a battalion. Too beautiful, I thought. Too powerful. They were not plants at all. Next paragraph. We were not far from the house. I saw the drive broaden to the sweep I had expected, with the blood red wall still flanking us on either side. We turned the last corner and so came to Manderley. Yes, there it was, the Manderley I had expected, the Manderley of my picture postcard long ago, a thing of grace and beauty, exquisite and faultless, lovelier than ever before. So the picture postcard, of course, is idealized, and that's the picture she had in her head. But there's something weird about these flowers. The gardens led to the sea. The sea is going to appear frequently. The sea is symbolic of the role that nature plays in existence. It can be beautiful and sparkly, and but it's never potentially benevolent. It's also sometimes threatening, but its role isn't deliberately benevolent or deliberately malevolent. Its potential role for conflict with humans is there. Notice how often what I have started to do or had started to do is I started circling the references to the sea because they're everywhere. So the gardens lead to the sea. Over on page 67, here she's got that little pain at the pit of my stomach, a nervous contraction in my throat. I would imagine she's got indigestion or something. Um, Fear. It's fear. I can close my eyes now and look back on it and see myself as I must have been, standing on the threshold of the house, a slim, awkward figure in my stockinette dress, clutching in my sticky hands a pair of gauntlet gloves. So she's got her sticky hands, they're sweaty, and she's got gauntlet gloves, which are gloves that come up high and have a big um, cuff. She sees in here a sea of faces, open mouthed and curious, gazing at me as though they were the watching crowd about the block, and I the victim with my hands behind my back. Someone advanced from the sea of faces, someone tall and gaunt, dressed in deep black, whose prominent cheekbones and great hollow eyes gave her a skull's face, parchment white, set on a skeleton's frame. Whoa, it's Mrs. Danvers, and we're going to see her frequently referred to as having this white face. Remember the white azaleas. White becomes symbolic of Mrs. Danvers. In this case, her skull's face appears almost dead. Rebecca is dead. Her dignity, she has dignity and composure, but when she took my hand, hers was limp and heavy, deathly cold, and it lay in mine like a lifeless thing. She's dead like. This is Mrs. Danvers. And again, you kind of hear that gong. Gong. This is Mrs. Danvers. She has a voice as cold and lifeless as her hand had been. A few lines later, she stooped to pick them up. The eye speaker dropped her gloves, and she handed them to me. I saw a little smile of scorn upon her lips, and I guessed at once she considered me ill-bred. Something in the expression of her face gave me a feeling of unrest. Yeah, there's some foreboding in Mrs. Danvers. So then we have the two dogs, Cocker Spaniels. One is the old mother, and one is Jasper. Now, dogs, I'm sure that I have showed you this book before. Oops, a student gave this to me a long time ago. And if we look just at dogs, a line or two, the dog, no, evidence of the primary mythic role played by the dog, that of psychopomp, is worldwide. Companion. Having been man's companion in the light of living day, the dog becomes his guide through the darkness of death. At every stage of Western cultural history, the dog has been featured among such powerful psychopomps as Anubis and Cerberus. So the point is, these dogs become something of an outlet for Rebecca. And here's where Jasper first appears. His eyes were deep with meaning. Um, and if we go to the top of page 69, she's looking around the room, and the two dogs have their own baskets. Um, they, she thinks that they probably never sit in them because they sit on the furniture. Daphne, some members of the party also sit on the furniture, and somehow we don't care, do we? The long windows looked out upon the lawns, and beyond the lawns to the distant shimmer of the sea. Okay, so again, just take a few lines and see what the sea symbolizes of. But we have the beauty of the shimmer of the sea, and then we have, but when the sea is stormy, to reach the further shores entails a dangerous crossing of its treacherous stretch of water. Because of their apparent limitless extent, seas and oceans are images of the primal, undifferentiated state of primeval formlessness. Such was the ocean. That, so, as I said, it's not benevolent, it's not malevolent, but it is potentially dangerous for anybody attempting to cross it. I'm probably nearing the end, but I don't want to get as far behind as I think I am. Let's move on. Well, I'll just stick with it a few more lines, pages. There was an old, quiet smell about the room, as though the air in it was little changed for all the sweet lilac scent and the roses brought to it throughout the summer. Whatever air came to this room, whether from the garden or from the sea, would lose its first freshness, becoming part of the unchanging room itself. One of the books, musty and never read, one of the scrolled ceiling, the dark paneling, the heavy curtains. I thought this was an interesting assessment from her because Manderley doesn't change. Even when she comes there, it doesn't change. It's a room, she says, for peace, a room of meditation. Next paragraph, I thought how little I know of his life here at Manderley. Yep. End of the next paragraph. Asking no questions of the past and future, content with a little glory of the living present. She's trying to live in the present, but there is a lot of history here that she just can't comprehend. Last sentence on the bottom of 69. I knew him as a lover, as a friend. During those weeks I had forgotten that he had a life, orderly, methodical, a life which must be taken up again, continued as before, making vanished weeks a brief, discarded holiday. That's clearly what she's experiencing. A good bit of foreshadowing in there. Manderley is orderly and methodical. And we're going to see the staff maintaining this order. We'll see why in a minute. Um, Page 70, second paragraph. I leaned back in my chair, glancing about the room, trying to instill into myself some measure of confidence, some genuine realization that I was here at Manderley, the house of the picture postcard, idealized. Um, and then she again generates some information for her. I mean, a story for her. We should grow old here together. We should sit like this to our tea as old people, Maxime and I, with our dogs, the successors of these, and the library would wear the same ancient musty smell that it did now. It would know a period of glorious shabbiness, and where, when the boys were young, our boys, notice that they're boys, doesn't she even want a girl? For I saw them sprawling on the sofa with muddy boots, bringing with them always a litter of rods, cricket bats, and great clasp knives, bows, and arrows. That's her dream of the future. She's always imagining. At the bottom of the page, my vision was disturbed by the opening of the door, and Frith came in with the footman to clear the tea. Mrs. Danvers wondered, madam, whether you would like to see your room. She hasn't even been to her room. Um, Maxime glanced up from his letters. What sort of job have they made of the East Wing? So they've renovated the East Wing. And what we've come to know is that the West Wing used to be where um, Rebecca and Maxine, that was the wing they occupied. Oh, just a second, I got a little note here. So the interesting thing is that this house is big enough that it houses um, East and West wings. Well, um, Maxime and Rebecca lived in the West Wing, and the East Wing, where Maxime and the new Mrs. De Winter lived. The West Wing overlooks the ocean and the woods. It's framed by blood red rhododendrons, which Rebecca herself cultivated, and which also are here to decorate the morning room, also Rebecca's personal domain. The West Wing is truly the larger and more beautiful. Rebecca's bedroom is especially gorgeous. Mrs. Danvers tries to maintain that room. Kind of creepy. She doesn't even smell the musty odors so obvious to new Mrs. De Winter. Um, the East Wing has just had an expensive redecorating job and overlooks the rose garden. Um, Mrs. Danvers has been maintaining the rose garden, and it was cultivated by Rebecca, of course. But the one thing that is different about the rose garden is that at one point Maxime says that he never allowed anyone to cut any of the flowers from the outside because once he brought them in, they all died, which is true. Um, except for the roses. The roses have been cultivated, and so they can come in without perishing. It's kind of like cutting lily of the valley. I think I said this last week. The second you bring them in, they die. So we wonder why Maxine has the East Wing done up for them, and we wonder if it's because that West Wing has become a shrine to Rebecca. Well, in fact, it has. Thank you, Mrs. Danvers. Okay. So he tells the high speaker, run along and make friends with Mrs. Danvers. It's a good opportunity. That's language that we all use with children. Now run along. Go make friends. Again, putting her age into perspective. So she follows Frith, sorry. And there's another analogy in the middle of page 71. My feet rang on the flagged stones, echoing to the ceiling, and I felt guilty at the sound as one does in church, self conscious, aware of the same constraint. I thought that Frith made his felt that Frith with his felt shoes must have thought me foolish. She just can't get away from that. Down at the bottom of this page, a black figure stood waiting for me at the head of the stairs, the hollow eyes watching me intently from the white skull's face. So it's white, like the azaleas. She's kind of deadish, kind of. Next page, 72. The rose garden lay below, in the eastern part of the terrace, while beyond the rose garden rose a smooth grass bank stretching to the near woods. You can't see the sea from here, I said, turning to Mrs. Danvers. No, not from this wing. It's the west wing. She spoke in a peculiar way, as though something lay behind her words, and she laid an emphasis on the words this wing, as if suggesting that the suite where we stood now held some inferiority. We don't know if she holds some inferiority to the east wing, but we do know that, and we'll find out more about this, that Mrs. Danvers is devoted to the memory of Rebecca and preserves the west wing. The top, middle of page 73. I'm afraid that would not do for so long, she said. It's usual, for ladies in your position to have a personal maid. Oh, she says that Mrs. Danvers says that the eye speaker needs a maid, again denoting class. And the eye speaker says, I don't have one. So she's kind of down on the bottom. She was kind of the maid before with Mrs. Van Hopper. Towards the bottom of page 73. I suppose you've been here at Manderley for many years, I said, making a fresh effort. Longer than anyone else? Not so long as Frisk, she said, and I thought how lifeless her voice was, and cold, like her hand when it lay in my hand. Again, death-like, down at the bottom of page 73. Once more I glanced up at her, and once more I met her eyes, dark and somber, in that white face of hers, instilling into me, I know not why, a strange feeling of disquiet, of foreboding. I tried to smile and could not. I found myself held by those eyes that had no light, no flicker of sympathy towards me. Again, pay attention to the facial expressions. Mrs. Danvers always looks dead white. I envision her moving without motion, kind of skating along. She's, again, deadish. The top of the next page, 74. I came here when the first Mrs. De Winter was a bride, she said, and her voice, which had hitherto, as I said, been dull and toneless, was harsh now with unexpected animation, with life and meaning, and there was a spot of color on the gaunt cheekbones. There's something about the memory of Mrs. De Winter that enlivens Mrs. Danvers. I was shocked and a little scared. Still her eyes never left my face. They looked upon me with a curious mixture of pity and of scorn, until I felt myself to be even younger and more untutored in the ways of life than I had believed. Next paragraph, I could see she despised me, making with all the snobbery of her class that I was no great lady, that I was humble, shy, and diffident. Yet there was something besides scorn in those eyes of hers, something surely of positive dislike or actual malice. So that is in her facial expression. So we begin to see the eye speaker make a series of errors in her relationship with Mrs. Danvers. And one of them is in the next paragraph. Let's see. I know I can leave all household arrangements to you. Mr. De Winter said so, and you must just run things as they have always been run. I shan't want to make any changes. That's she's not asserting herself in this place that's going to remain unchanged, that's going to have this aura about it. She says down at the bottom, in the next paragraph, it was very different, of course, when the late Mrs. De Winter, was alive. There was a lot of entertaining then, a lot of parties, and though I managed for her, she liked to supervise things herself. So there's the comparison. Even Mrs. Danvers is creating that comparison. Top of 75. Um, I would rather leave it to you, she repeated, much rather, and into her face came the same expression I had noticed before, when at first I had shaken hands with her in the hall, a look surely of derision, of definite contempt. She knew that I would never withstand her, and that I feared her too. Oh, that is a star paragraph, but we don't know why. This Mrs. De Winter speculates that it's because she's down the social ladder. We don't know. Um, I wish she would go. She was like a shadow standing there, watching me, appraising me with her hollow eyes, set in that dead skull's face, over and over. Um, she, Mrs. Danvers, repeatedly refers to the West Wing at the top of page 76. This poor creature, the eye speaker, pretty much has nothing to do. It's the most beautiful room in the house, and the windows look down across the lawn to the sea. That's in the West Wing. Next paragraph. I felt uncomfortable, a little shy. I did not know why she must speak with such an undercurrent of resentment, applying as she did at the same time that this room where I found myself to be installed was something inferior, not up to Manderley's standard, a second-rate room, as it were, for a second-rate person. It's so sad. The comparison occurs again in the middle of the page. The bedrooms were never shown to the public, she said, only the hall and the gallery and the rooms below. She paused an instant, feeling me with her eyes. They used to live in the West Wing and use those rooms when Mrs. De Winter was alive. That big room I was telling you about that looked down to the sea was Mrs. De Winter's bedroom. The comparison is very palpable. Um, Over on page 77, don't mind her. He asks her, the eye speaker, what she thinks of Mrs. Danvers, and he says, don't mind her. She's an extraordinary character in many ways, possibly not very easy for another woman to get on with. She's a bit of a bully to the staff. It's natural enough that she would resent me a bit at first, she says. Resent you? Why? What the devil do you mean by that? And he says, overbearing, my God, he said, if you think, and then he stopped and came across to me and kissed me on the top of her head, like she's a child. His treatment of her is a little bit strange. He never really is forthcoming with his feelings to her. She has said that she loves him, but he certainly hasn't committed to her. I began to feel more like the self I wanted to become and the self I had pictured in my dreams, who made Manderley her home. We'll see about that. And then it looks down at the bottom of the page. As I sat there brooding, my chin in my hands, fondling the soft ears of one of the spaniels, it came to me. So, you got to pay attention to that too. When things are awkward, she bends down and pets the dog. Of course, who doesn't do that? It came to me that I was not the first one to lounge there in possession of the chair. Someone had been before me, and surely had left an imprint of her person on the cushions. It's kind of creepy. Doesn't that sound like the lost Lenore? And on the arm where her hand had rested, another one had poured the coffee from the same silver pot, had placed the cup to her lips, had bent down to the dog, even as I was doing. She just is absorbed into a setting that is already intact. Unconsciously, I shivered. I would too, as though someone had opened the door behind me and let a draft into the room. I was sitting in Rebecca's chair. I was leaning against Rebecca's cushion, and the dog had come to me and laid his head upon my knee because that was his custom. That's the second time we've seen that word, custom. And he remembered in the past she had given sugar to him there. I mean, even the dog is committed to the lost Rebecca. So I think before this gets too long, we'll stop here, and I'm going to try. I'm always playing catch up, um, but there's a lot in this book, as you have seen. It's a quick and entertaining read, but there's so many um, symbols and references and um, interpretation of time and imaginative longing. The whole book is full of that. What was I supposed to do? I was supposed to get to page. Um, I'm not too bad. Oh, yes, to 120. So I'm about. Well, we'll catch up. I always do. Um, so that's all for today. Um, Daphne wants attention. I'm sure you can hear her. Um, and we will pick up next week and attempt to catch up. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm going to upload this now, and I will talk to you next week. Remember, there are 2 installments today.